Hello, everyone, and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate day number 562. 562. September the 28th, 2018, Friday. Thank you so much for tuning in. Well, I'm pretty sure the topic of the day is the follow-up and the the fallout, I should say, from the hearings yesterday with Kavanaugh and his accuser, Blasey Ford. Now, as you're watching this video, they should be having the vote, and hopefully Kavanaugh will be confirmed. As far as I know, they are still having, at this hour, Thursday evening at about 9 o'clock, they are still planning on having the vote on Friday morning. So hopefully that will occur, and hopefully Kavanaugh will be confirmed. Now, I was in and out of meetings most of the day, and so we had the hearings on in my office, but I was in another office in meetings about half the day. I was in and out of my office. I didn't get to hear it all. I got home and I've watched about an hour and a half of just the highlights or lowlights, however you want to look at it. So I feel like I've seen enough of it. I can offer some fairly decent comments on at least my own feelings on what I saw today and what my thoughts are. My mind wasn't changed at all by anything that I saw or heard today. But let me cut into some of the more details of what I observed from these hearings, and then a few other items as well at the aftermath. Okay, so I just jotted down some notes, so I'm just going to go through these, as I go, and tell you what I think here. Blasey Ford was told, of course, that Kavanaugh denies completely being at the party or knowing her or having anything to do with any of this. And when she was pushed on it a little bit by this female prosecutor, she came back and said that she was 100% confident that it was Kavanaugh that assaulted her. So this idea that maybe she just thought it was Kavanaugh, but it's somebody else or whatever, no, she never gave that any possibility whatsoever. She is saying she's 100% certain it was Kavanaugh that assaulted her. Now, if she could sit here and recite all sorts of details from that time in history, then I would say, well, wow, she's got a pretty good memory. She can recall all these things, so that may play into her favor. But the problem here is that she's 100% it was Kavanaugh, but everything else about that night appears to be a complete, void. She has no memory of how she got there, how she got home, who took her there. All these other things, she has no details of. She can't remember any of it. The only thing that she does remember 100% for sure, though, is that it was Kavanaugh. And I'm skeptical, and so to me, that statement, which would normally be a fairly forceful statement to say, yes, I'm 100% sure, I'm not mistaken on who it was Kavanaugh. If she could give me more details and I could say, yes, she's got a good recollection of the events or whatever, then it would be more believable. But the fact that it's the only detail that she seems to be able to be 100% certain about, and all the other details about that evening seem to be completely clouded in her mind, or she can't remember them at all. So on this particular point, I have to say I cannot believe her. So her statement that she's 100% sure that it was Kavanaugh, not convinced. I don't believe her. Now, she may believe that, but I don't believe it happened. Let's put it that way. The next thing I made a note of is Lindsey Graham. I've been watching Lindsey Graham for a long time. Most of you know I'm not a big fan, although he has been coming around lately. It seems like since Senator Magoo achieved room temperature that Lindsey Graham has changed his tune a lot. And it may be because he knows Senator Magoo was involved in a pretty big way in the attempted coup and involved in other things as well. And I know they were good friends and everything, but he's probably disappointed in that. But now Magoo is gone. And for whatever reason, Lindsey Graham has been having a pretty good relationship with the president. And that's good. But I will say, and I will give credit when credit is due, and I will say that Lindsey Graham, without a doubt, gave the best 5 minutes of his time. The best 5 minutes of the day was Lindsey Graham. I mean, he gave an excellent rebuttal to these charges. And I've never seen Lindsey Graham that angry before. I mean, he was pissed. I'm sure many of you have seen the video clip. He was really pissed, and he really called out the Democrats. I mean, he didn't pull any punches at all. I mean, he definitely went off. And so I definitely think that Lindsey Graham did the very best of anyone in the hearings today. Of, you know, I think he did a very good job of representing what I feel, what many of you feel, that anger and that frustration. I think he did a very good job of letting people know how, not just how he feels, but he was representing the feelings of an awful lot of people who I'm sure are people he's heard from. And so I got to give a hats off to Lindsey Graham. He really used his 5 minutes to its maximum potential, and it was good to see Lindsey Graham come unglued like that. He made rational points. You know, he didn't come unglued or anything. I mean, he made very rational points, but clearly he was extremely angry, and not so much angry at Ford. He didn't really point the finger at her. In fact, he even said, you know, you're a victim in all this. You're being played by the Democrats. But he really went after the Democrats, and particularly Turn In Your Guns, Mr. and Mrs. America Feinstein, and a couple of the other Democrats on that committee. So, good job, Lindsey Graham. Best 5 minutes of the day. Now, another thing I thought was interesting is when this female prosecutor really, I thought, got Blasey Ford on this allegation that she was afraid to fly. Because we learned from that testimony that she admits to being, having flown to the Mid-Atlantic in this past summer back in July. She admits to traveling by air to Hawaii, Costa Rica, the South Pacific, French Polynesia, and other places. So apparently for a woman who's afraid of flying, she does an awful lot of flying. But this whole idea that she had to fly to Washington was BS. Grassley made the offer to her to have them come out and interview her in California, or wherever she wanted to be interviewed. They would have gone wherever she wanted them to go. Again, I'm very surprised she showed up, but you know, she may not have had any choice because she had already gone too far in the game, and they probably realized that if they did try to pull out, it would be a complete disaster, that the whole thing would blow up on them. And even though she's not a very good witness, and she could crack up or something, I guess they felt like they could coach her enough to get her through it. So she did show up, and that was the biggest surprise of the day for me, the fact that she even showed up and testified. But the prosecutor, the female prosecutor that questioned her on the issue of fear of flying, I think that got totally blown up by this female prosecutor when she went through the various trips that Blasey Ford has taken, and so she doesn't seem to have any problem with flying if it's for a vacation or going somewhere. Oh, it's only a problem when there's a nomination hearing for Kavanaugh. Then she's got a problem with flying. So that whole thing got blown up. That got blown up, and I think that that was obvious to most people. Another thing that I thought was very, really perked my ears up is when Kavanaugh was giving his opening statement, and he said that among the various reasons of the people who were going after him, Democrats and so forth, and he's naming these various groups of people who are going after him, he specifically said, revenge on behalf of the Clintons. Revenge on behalf of the Clintons. What is he suggesting here? Of course, we know that he was on the team that was looking into Slick Willie's shenanigans back in the 90s. And was part of that whole investigation into Slick Willie. But I don't know how much to put into this, exactly how much or what he knows, but someone's probably whispered in his ear and maybe told him, hey, maybe the Clintons are really the ones behind this. And would anyone doubt it to find out that the rotten Reverend Clinton and the resistance is partly, or maybe in large part, behind this? Whenever you see a show like this, a crap show like this, the rotten Reverend Clinton and her pervert rapist husband cannot be far behind, in something like this. It's whenever something rotten like this is happening, you just know the rotten Reverend Clinton is probably connected to it in some way. The only question we don't know, or what we don't know here, is how connected. How much did the Clintons have to do with this whole charade? Is it the rotten Reverend Clinton that put this whole thing together? Organized this smear campaign? People working for the rotten Reverend Clinton on her behalf or at her direction? Who do you think's paying for all this? There's a lot of questions, and investigation does need to be set in motion to get to the bottom of who's really behind all this. Because I think anyone that watched this hearing today and watched Blasey Ford can put two and two together pretty quickly and realize she's not the person that put all this together. No, I just don't buy that. There's a lot more going on here than we can see, but was very, very, let's say, perked my ears up quite a bit when Kavanaugh said that one of the reasons that this was all happening was revenge on behalf of the Clintons. Do you think that we're going to find out in the next couple of days or weeks that the rotten Reverend Clinton or her allies were deeply involved in this entire show? I don't think anyone would put it past the Clintons, or anyone will be surprised if we come to find out that the rotten Reverend Clinton had her finger in this pie. His opening statement was very good, by the way. Some people say, well, he got angry, he cried, or whatever. Well, he was angry as hell, and sometimes men get mad, they cry, I guess. I don't know. I don't, but, some men do cry when they get angry. He was pretty pissed, and for good reason. But he vehemently denied the allegations. He didn't use a bunch of weaselly words like lawyers do, and he's a judge. He obviously knows how to use weasel words. He didn't use any weasel words. Never has. From day one, he's been saying straight up, using straight language, I didn't do it, don't know anything about it, these are false accusations, or what have you. He's clearly denied it the whole time. He also stated that this was a grotesquely coordinated character assassination. Grotesque, coordinated character assassination. And who is it that specializes in grotesque, coordinated character assassinations? The rotten Reverend Clinton and her goons. That is who specializes in grotesque, coordinated character assassinations. They've been doing it their entire careers. Clintons have been destroying people like Kavanaugh and others their entire careers. We learned that Blasey Ford's lawyers were referred to her by Feinstein's staff. Turn in your guns, Mr. and Mrs. America Feinstein obviously had a role to play. And at least one of those attorneys, and probably both, well, one of them attorneys obviously is close connections to the DNC. The other one, Katz, which is probably the one that Feinstein referred, is of course a Democratic activist and all the rest. So they're both very, very closely connected to the Democratic Party, the left wing, the resistance, the whole nine yards. And who is the leader of that movement? The rotten Reverend Clinton is the leader of the resistance movement. And when she was asked about her good friend, this woman, Leland Kaiser, and about the fact that her good friend, Leland Kaiser, stated that she didn't know Kavanaugh, had never met Kavanaugh, had never been to a party with Kavanaugh, and that she couldn't corroborate anything that her friend Blasey Ford was saying. And what was Ford's response to that? Well, basically she went off and basically said, well, she's having some health issues. In other words, to make it sound like her friend is crazy, or something wrong with her medically, or for some reason it's something wrong with her, because she doesn't recollect anything like this happening, or doesn't know about this happening, doesn't know Kavanaugh, or whatever. The fact that she could not corroborate Ford's accusation, therefore Ford says that she has some health issues, some health challenges, and that she hopes she gets better. We also are hearing now that the Senate Judiciary Committee is interviewing 2 men who have come forward who believe that they may be the individuals that had the encounter with Ford. And this has been out there now for about a day and a half. We still don't know much more about it. But apparently there's 2 guys who think maybe they're the ones who Ford is talking about. Be interesting to learn more about that and to get their story as to certainly they're not going to come forward and admit to being part of this thing here. So obviously they're going to dispute what happened, but maybe they have some information as to why there could be a mix-up here as far as who was involved. We don't know anything other than 2 men have come forward to the Senate Judiciary Committee who they're speaking with them as we speak, and that they apparently had an encounter with Ford. They don't admit to being guilty of the crime she's alleging. The words that they're using is that these 2 men, had an encounter with Ford. I guess we'll find out more as this goes on. Now, here's some other things that, again, there was no new evidence brought forward today by Ford. She brought no new evidence. Everything we've heard before, she said today. But she continues to get certain facts wrong and changes certain facts. Because we have statements that of course, the Washington Post story, we've heard statements attributed to her coming from other sources. And then, of course, we saw the hearing today. So here's some more things that just continue to not be clear in cases where her story continues to change. So Ford said that she couldn't remember the date that she wrote the letter to Feinstein. Could not remember the date that she wrote that letter to Turn In Your Guns, Mr. and Mrs. America Feinstein. Well, it wouldn't be a hard date to remember, because it blew up all over the media. It was July the 31st. We now know that. But she certainly would have known at that time that she, when this occurred, because she'd been interviewed by the Washington Post, and she had all this information. It's hard for me to believe that she wouldn't know the approximate date of when she wrote that letter to Turn In Your Guns, Mr. and Mrs. America Feinstein. Ford also said that she wrongly accused Patrick Smythe as a bystander. She now says that he was not in the room when the alleged assault took place. And she gives the excuse for getting that wrong, saying that it was because of a sense of urgency she felt when she was typing the text. So you have a sense of urgency because you're typing this text, and so therefore you get a very, very big detail wrong. You accuse someone of being in the room or being a bystander when this happened, and then you have to flip-flop and say, in the hearing, say, no, well, now that I think about it, he was not in the room when the alleged assault occurred, Mr. Smythe. And the reason I got that wrong was because I was feeling a sense of urgency when I was typing the text. Why would feeling a sense of urgency cause you to get a detail like that so wrong, especially on an issue of such great importance? A man's name who's now public, Mr. Smythe, who's now having to probably answer all sorts of questions from all kinds of people about his involvement in this, when in fact it appears now he really had no involvement in this. She just got it wrong out of a sense of urgency when she was typing a text. She still can't decide on how many people were in the room, whether it was 4, she told her therapist, then it was 5, then it was 2. So was it 4, 5, or 2? She apparently still has not sorted this out. She, of course, changed her position on who pushed her into the bedroom. First, she said it was Mark Judge that pushed her into the bedroom. Then, she said it was Kavanaugh that pushed her into the bedroom. And now, she's not sure. And we're supposed to believe this woman. She says she can't remember if she gave the therapy notes to the Washington Post. Can't remember if it was her. Maybe it was her lawyers. Someone. gave the notes to the Washington Post, where would they get them? Her therapist certainly wouldn't turn them over just because the Washington Post called and asked. Why would her attorneys turn over those notes? Why would you do that to your client? Why would you turn over notes between your client and their therapist to the media to be scrutinized? I don't think it helped her case. Admitting that your client is seeing a therapist generally doesn't help your case. And she says she can't remember if she gave the therapy notes to the Washington Post. Well, either she gave them to the Washington Post or she probably knew about it. I mean, would her lawyers release that information and not tell her? Only if they were trying to use her or set her up. She can't remember if she took the polygraph exam on the day of her grandmother's funeral or the day after. She can't remember whether the exam was recorded on audio or video. She can't remember. That's not something you forget. It's something you either know or you don't know. You don't forget. I mean, it just happened. I mean, this lie detector she took was recent. How would you forget this information? You wouldn't. I mean, you either know it or you don't know it. But she says she forgot, can't remember. And she can't remember on the day, what day she took the polygraph, whether it was on the day of her grandmother's funeral or the day after. Well, you know, it seems to me that her grandmother has obviously recently passed away. It seems to me that you would remember pretty much details of your grandmother's funeral, especially if it just happened within the last 3 months. It seems to me you would certainly remember what you did that day. I mean, you would remember if you had a lie detector test on the same day that you went to your grandmother's funeral, wouldn't you? I mean, that's 2 major events that you would be doing in one day. Who would schedule a lie detector on the day they know they have to go to their grandmother's funeral? I mean, you can't postpone your grandmother's funeral, but you could postpone the lie detector. If I had a lie detector test lined up and then my grandmother died, I'd probably call and say, my grandmother died and she has her funeral on such and such a day, the day we had scheduled that lie detector. I'm going to have to change the day. I mean, you would have knowledge of these details in your mind. It's not things that you would forget. This is recent. This is recent history. This is not 35 years ago. This is 3 months ago or less. But she can't remember if she took the polygraph exam on the same day of her grandmother's funeral. That's quite hard to believe. Ford said she was introduced to Kavanaugh by a boyfriend who knew Kavanaugh, but she can't either remember or she won't identify the boyfriend. Now, why wouldn't she identify the boyfriend if she knows who it is? It would certainly help her case, because one of the cases that Kavanaugh is making is that he's never met her and doesn't know her. Well, if she could, or he doesn't recall meeting her or knowing her. If she's got a boyfriend or someone who could corroborate her story that, yeah, in fact, he introduced her to Kavanaugh and he does know Kavanaugh, that would certainly help her credibility. But she either can't tell us who the boyfriend was or won't tell us who the boyfriend is. Why not? She can remember Kavanaugh. She can remember Mark Judge, remember all these people, but she can't remember the boyfriend that she had. I remember pretty much all of my girlfriends, going all the way back to high school. Especially if you jog my memory and say their name. And I go back to the question that we've been asking all along. So those are the basic discrepancies from her testimony compared to what she said in the Washington Post, compared to therapist notes and other things. Different stories. And generally, when a person's giving different stories, the story keeps changing, it usually means that they're not telling the truth. It's hard to keep the details together when what you're saying is a lie. And clearly there's a lot of details she can't get right or keep straight. They seem to change. Evidence that she's lying. So it goes back to this question I asked from the very beginning, which I think we need to get down to the bottom of, which is, who is paying these lawyers? Who's behind it? Because the people who are paying these lawyers are the people who are behind it. Who is paying these lawyers? Don't give me this bullshit that they're working pro bono. You think Mrs. Katz or Mr. Bromwich are working for free? I don't think so. They're being paid. They're being paid. I can assure you of that. And something tells me that Ford is going to get a lucrative book and movie deal. Watch and see if in the next 6 months or so we don't hear about a book coming out, a movie coming out, where she'll be paid millions of dollars. This is her vacation plan. This is her retirement plan right here. That's what this is. I promise you, she is going to make bank on this deal. Isn't it interesting that Kavanaugh, if he did do these things, which he didn't, but if he did, isn't it interesting that he just happened to, unfortunately, choose to commit these violations against 3 individuals who would later become hardcore left-wing activists, social justice warriors. Uh-oh. Gee, if you're going to commit sexual assault, could have at least picked a couple Republicans. What do you think the odds are that of all the people he could have assaulted, that they all 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, 14, however many there are, they all seem to have one thing in common. They're all left-wing activists with ties to left-wing party apparatchiks who engage in this type of behavior and dirty tricks. Isn't that quite the coincidence? All the so-called victims are left-wing social justice warrior activists connected to the Democratic Party. Should we be a little suspicious of that? Now, my general take on watching, I saw probably about 15 minutes of Q&A with Professor Ford. And so now I'm just going to give you my general idea of what I think about her now that I've seen her, watched her body language, watched her speak, watched her eye movement, watched her body gestures and everything else, watch how she responded to the questions, the whole 9 yards, listening to the content of her answers, the way she formulated her answers, the way she spoke, facial expressions, eye movements, all these things. When I look at all that, my general overview of what I think of Professor Ford would be the following. Now, to accurately tell you what I think, it's going to require, it's going to require that I offer up a profanity alert. For those of you who don't like profanity, here in just a few seconds, you might want to skip about 15 seconds ahead on the video once I start speaking, because I'm about to drop some profanity. So I'll make it very quick. Here it is, my general thoughts and feelings after watching her testify about what I just generally think about Professor Ford. Are you ready? Hold your kids' ears. 3, 2, 1. Okay, my opinion of Professor Ford, having watched her in the hearings of all the things I just told you, my general opinion of what I think of Professor Ford is that she's a fucking dingbat. A fucking dingbat. That's my general thoughts on Professor Ford. The type of person who could be easily manipulated. A very weak-minded individual. Very weak-minded individual. And keep in mind, she's a psychology professor. Do you know, I took psychology, a couple classes in college, and these psychology professors are whack jobs anyway. I had 2 or 3 of them. They were all wacky, crazy as hell. And some of the things that they have you do, experiments and things that they have you do in class and in school projects, are pretty crazy, pretty wacky. I've come to learn that there are many psychology professors who like to play little games with their students in class. And many psychology professors like to do this little thing where they have their students tell a couple friends something horrific that happened to them just to get their response. And the idea is to lie and to make something up that's not true to get the response, and to quickly tell them after they get the response that they were just joking, to get the total responses of how the person reacted. Like telling someone, and this has been actually done in psychology classes by psychology professors. One of the things that they will use is to have a female student tell some other students that she was violently raped, just to get the response of those people. And then once they say, and they're horrified, then the person goes, I was just joking, it's a class experiment, I just needed to get your reaction. Now what's your reaction to me now telling you the truth? That it really didn't happen. See, this is one of those many experiments, and that specific type of experiment, that exact example, has been used by many college professors. I wonder if Professor Ford has ever used that technique. So, I don't believe her. I'm 90% sure she's lying, and she knows she's lying. There's about 10% of me that thinks something may have happened to her, but hard to know what. I largely believe that she is a political operative, that she's a weak-minded person who someone got to and discovered, hey man, I know this professor out in California, fucking whack job. I bet you if we get her into therapy, we can probably pump some shit at her. We can probably pump some stuff into her mind. Sure would help the cause. She sure loved Hillary. She's awfully disappointed, and she knows Kavanaugh. She grew up in the same area, ran around in the same area, knows people he knows. If we play our cards right, we can hook this thing up. So, who knows? These are all things that we can speculate on. But I think we'll have to wait about 3 to 6 months and wait for a book or a movie to come out, and then we'll know what her true motivations were. But something tells me she's retiring early with quite the retirement plan, probably something in the 7-8 figure range. We'll just have to watch and see. Finally, 3 other notes. We're about to have a lot of fun here in the next couple months. Next few weeks, I should say. Because guess what? Ocasio-Cortez, who I don't think is going to win that seat. I think Crowley's going to win in that seat. But she's going to debate the Republican who's running for that seat. And it just so happens that he is a guy named Anthony Pappas. And do you know what Mr. Pappas does for a living? He's an economics professor from Yale. Ocasio-Cortez is going to be standing toe-to-toe debating a Yale-educated economics professor who's a conservative, or at least a Republican. That should be a blast. We also have Glenn Simpson, who's refusing to testify to the House Intelligence Committee. I'm pretty sure they'll subpoena him anyway, and we'll see if he fights the subpoena and pleads the fifth. He's probably going to jail. Finally, the House Intelligence Committee, Nunes Committee, is going to release 53 interviews that they conducted during the Russia meddling investigation. That would include Clapper, Lynch, Yates, Powers, Rhodes, Simpson, Mark Elias, David Kramer, and Mike Gatta. All those interviews with the committee are going to be released by Nunes Committee soon. Thank you so much for tuning in. You guys have a good night. See you. Bye.